Greetings sailors and welcome to a Patreon supporter replay, and this time it is long-time supporter Armorama in the Kid again. And I say again because we had a Kid replay relatively recently. This one is going to feature two carriers, as you can see, which is always a joy for every other player in the game, and especially so if you happen to be in a destroyer. But at least the Kid, when top tier with its defensive, does have still reasonably effective AA. It does rather rely on that defensive though for the extra kick of AA damage, because unlike the Swedish destroyers, the base AA isn't quite as good. So smoking into the C cap for his Chapayev ally there even, and that's a pretty smart move. It means he's going to get their radar, the benefit of their radar potentially if anything were to come and contest the cap, although if anything were contesting the cap he would have spotted it, and well, I'd say that just as a Hatsuharu turns up, so he opens up confident that if the Hatsuharu does smoke, well, he's got a radar cruiser behind him that can help out. He has to be slightly careful about getting shot himself here though. Of course, although he does have a heal, you still don't want to burn too much health too quickly, especially when you are in a destroyer, just because you don't have that much to begin with. But like I said in that previous video, having the heal does make a huge difference. And in that case, well, he's managed not to take too much damage, so he doesn't actually have to use a heal just yet anyway. So not a bad start, but you better believe that carriers harassing him is going to be a really frequent feature of this game, especially as there's only 3 destroyers per team and each side has lost 1 already. And so, although you would think it wouldn't be the best idea for carriers to be sending their planes after a Kid over and over, maybe for the carriers it still seemed like the most attractive target compared to other blobs of ships. And indeed, there we go there. Lexington just took out the poor Gallant, who was probably quite glad that his suffering was over so quickly. So on to the B cap, which has been thus far uncontested. And if he's lucky, he might get to actually take this without having to pop another smoke. He's not running Superintendent here, I don't think, so he's only got 3 smokes and 3 heals to work with. Superintendent on the Kid is a pretty good idea overall, but if you're running a more AA focused build, which Armorama might be, you might forego that and actually, you know, get AA DPS and main battery DPS as your focus instead. And overall, there's a lot of situations with destroyers, particularly where if you can get away with not using it, Superintendent isn't really a necessity in the way that it might be seen as being so on, say, a battleship, where having that extra heal can really keep you alive a lot longer. Destroyers, you know, even ones with a heal, they do have some natural sneakiness and smoke to rely on for the most part. Well, I say natural sneakiness, you know, a large part of that is negated when there are 2 enemy carriers in play. It does look like he's going to get this though. He's only lost a little bit more health. He's also racking up a few more plane kills, although for the time being, ooh, a bit of blind fire there. For the time being, it looks like it's the Lexington that's harassing him more, and that kind of makes sense. The Ryujo is obviously going to have far squashier planes relative to the strength of the Kid's AA. Not sure who's blind firing there. I think that might be one of the whatever enemy destroyer that is. Can't quite see on the minimap, but yeah. They came fairly close to getting a reset there once or twice, but not quite close enough. However, even though he's now capped, he's not out of the woods yet, because yay, here come more planes, and this Lexington's going to try and make a blind hit as well. So Even more practice for his gunners. They don't come that close, although still close enough. And there we go, there's another bunch of plane kills. So between the sectoring, between the defensive, he's already up to 17 plane kills already. And we're not even quite halfway there yet. So I think Armor getting AA Defense medal is probably a fairly strong possibility at this rate. So the Shenyang heading for B. He doesn't have to worry about being torped by the Shenyang, of course, but they have the same fast-firing US 5-inch guns that Armor does, so potentially could be a bit nasty in a gunfight, although with the heal that this has and the overall bleh nature of the Shenyang, personally I would always take the kid in that fight. It's just, you know, how many hit points are you prepared to lose potentially? More planes coming in, of course, but these ones do not look like they are headed for him. They might well be going for the Chapayev, but they're still passing close enough to pick him up. And as he spotted the Lex, decides, well, even though these are dive bombers, I'm gonna have a go anyway. Which is, of course, jolly annoying for Armor because now he's got to dodge, and he's spotted, and he's also had his engine incapacitated, even though he didn't actually take any damage, because even when you get splashes in the water like that, it can still count as, you know, the bombs detonating when hitting the water and causing incapacitations. That's what's happening sometimes, by the way, as well with high explosive shells. If you don't take damage and yet something gets knocked out on your ship, it's because the explosion hasn't knocked off any hit points, but things like your engine, your rudder, your AA guns, you know, they have their own hit points relative to the overall hit points of the ship. The modules have their own hit points, so it's possible for them to get put into a state where they're knocked out and you know, are gone in the case of AA, or need to be repaired in the case of things like engines and torp tubes. Anyway, it has come down to a gunfight with the Shenyang, and it looks like Armor has chosen to just go with it, to just stick with it. The Shenyang maybe was on cooldown with their smoke. The Pan Asians do get a sort of little and often smokes to work with, which is quite a nice feature of that line overall. So luckily Armor managed to catch them in between that. Did sacrifice a lot of health though, you know, as it turned out. Yes, that was an expensive fight in terms of health, so he's going to basically have to use up his last heal when that comes available, having already burned one as a result of that fight. More AA action there, and that got him spotted briefly by the Atago, which is not great, but the Atago's currently firing at the Chapayev, but it was actually the Makarov that took them out. And that basically leaves Armor alone defending this flank, with the enemy carriers exactly aware of where he is. So that's going to be annoying, right? It does also leave these pair of caps vulnerable then to these cruisers. The Makarov, at least he could potentially gun down, but the Atago is quite high health and also has substantially bigger guns, so yeah, this is a problem. And this time it's the Ryujo trying their hand at taking him on, and they didn't really score a lot of damage their first time round, and like I said, the guns on this are definitely they're going to be more effective. The AA guns are going to be more effective against tier 6 planes, but the Ryujo actually does a smart thing here. They take a turn around the island to temporarily shield themselves from the AA, and well, they don't do a huge amount of damage, but still, that's the better part of 1,000 health less after that strike. And now he's just got an angry Atago to deal with, and potentially more planes, and he's down to one smoke, and his teammates are now starting to die at a slightly alarming pace. Oh, and of course his Shikaku is now in visual range of this Otago. So this is all suddenly going a bit pear-shaped. It looked like they were handling the enemy team relatively well, but they seem to have basically pushed too aggressively into the decap, and they've now lost a bunch of ships, and all that's left down there now is the Leander and the Hipper. Losing this tier 8 carrier would be a big blow. So instead of using it for himself, Armor does the noble thing, I guess you could call it, or well, the smart thing in terms of not losing a tier 8 carrier, hopefully, and uses his last smoke to try and shield them so they can make a getaway. But the problem with how the Shikaku had positioned themselves is they really can only get into the center, where potentially they could be spotted. So yeah, that's kind of the Shikaku's fault. They didn't leave themselves any good avenues for making an escape. In fact, really they should have been moving before the point that the Otago surface spotted them. So that's definitely on the Shikaku. With the Shikaku and the Vesa both very much suddenly focusing their attention on this Otago, well, that means that Armor can at least use this smoke himself, and with the fact they are doing some damage, his guns will hopefully be enough to finish off this Otago. Because although this does have torpedoes, it's only got a single launcher, and it doesn't reload particularly quickly. In fact, I'll tell you right now, there's going to be no torpedo hits in this entire match. I mean, we've covered most of the replay at this point anyway. I've done some fairly heavy editing on this one. But, yeah, just even in the remainder of this, no torp hits at all. Now, they're both focused on the Shikaku right now. The Otago looked at him briefly there, but yeah, he's absolutely got to use the window where he can. He's setting fires, but there goes the Shikaku, and they're also now capping B. This is very not good. There's 3 of them left. They have no cap points coming in at the moment. There is an angry Otago bearing down on Armor. The only saving grace is that it doesn't have the fastest rate of fire, although it's still pretty good. It's still pretty reasonable for a heavy cruiser. But just between his rate of fire and the Otago maybe shooting at the Vesa, I would guess that's what's spotted right now. Instead of solely focusing on Armor, the Otago basically gives him free rein to get the finishing blow with his guns. And I really don't know what the Otago was thinking there. The Vesa is almost full health, whereas Armor clearly not. Maybe he was hoping his own torpedoes would actually do the job, but anyway. If you're wondering why he bailed out the smoke, by the way, instead of sticking around, of course, Armor had absolutely no way of knowing if that Otago was using a defensive or a hydro. And on the Otago, it's best to assume hydro because the defensive AA is a bit of a waste. It doesn't really have a lot to work with in terms of your base AA. So, generally speaking, yeah, if you're taking defensive on an Otago and trying to buff the AA, you're probably not going to be getting very far. Somehow the Hipper is staying alive down in the south. That Makarov is very, very low health, and the Vesa does not get the kill, so there's another one for Armor. That's his 4th. They do have this one cap. They do have an advantage in points remaining, but the enemy team has got 3 of the 4 caps, and there are still both enemy carriers in play. So that's going to be really quite annoying, and I think Armor may be, I won't say panicked, but I think the use of the defensive was unnecessary here against the torpedo planes. They've skirted around him, he's done a bit of damage, but they seem more interested in trying to land hits on that Vesa. The Vesa itself, you know, carriers tend to have the best AA at their respective tiers, so yeah, given that it's against somebody that's well aware the drop is incoming and manoeuvring, I think in retrospect Armor probably could have saved that, especially as going into this cap without any smoke, he's going to have, oh, even more planes to deal with potentially. And by the way, have you noticed we're in now the final minute? This is going to be very, very close. Armor can't cap, he doesn't have the time to cap, but what he can do is disrupt this one cap to stop the enemy team gaining points quite so quickly. The question is, will it be enough? And is he going to survive these planes? And the carriers are clearly close enough to have gotten a strike up, you know, in his face. That's not the phrase I wanted to use, but anyway. But yeah, they just don't quite have the time to make the drop. But here's where a defensive would have been very useful, even so. Anyway, he did get his defensive AA medal. The Vesser's cap planes were helping out a bit there as well. They were close enough. But yeah, 42 aircraft kills at the end of that. Only 45k damage. So it wasn't a high damage game, but definitely an outsized impact for that damage. It was entirely down to Armor's actions at the end there, getting in that cap, disrupting that cap, that just gave them enough points to squeak out a win. It was very, very close. It was close enough that, you know, a couple of seconds not being, you know, quicker would have made the difference. So, yeah, that one was a bit of a nail biter, but in the end Armor was able to walk away with the win and survive versus two carriers. I think largely thanks to being in with the Kid with its heal and its defensive. So as I was saying in the other video, the Kid still a very good premium destroyer even today. I'm going to finish this one off by pointing out, as I did at the start, this was a Patreon supporter replay, and Patreon is, as I point out occasionally, basically what pays the bills, what keeps my lights on, what keeps Sam in cat food. So if you have $1 or $2 to spare, or if you're feeling exceptionally generous and you like my stuff that much, there's higher tiers of support as well. Yeah, it's all very much appreciated and basically means I can keep doing what I'm doing and you know, don't have to dress up in a sheep costume and go and stand around on street corners in the evenings. Not that that's the thing I've contemplated doing, of course. Anyway, that went off in a weird direction. Yeah, I don't know what to say after that. I guess the usual things will probably do it. So if you enjoyed this replay, you can do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.